wouldn't you know it, my stupid blue microphone, USB podcasting microphone, fell apart just in time for this interview. Ugh, can't say I was a fan of that microphone anyway, so farewell. But anyway, so everything's done with the laptop, so it's going to sound a little tinnier and a little more roomy, but hopefully I'll be staring a Shure SM7 in the face by next week's interview. In the meantime, enjoy, and I'll talk to you at the end. All right, this week I am pleased to present as the guest Ryan Gruss. Ryan is the founder and the leader, the head honcho behind the Loop Loft. There are a lot of companies that do loop packages, but I would say that of the people that I work with and the people whose work I respect, they are all big fans of the Loop Loft. And so when I was talking to people about some ideas, they were all like, oh man, if we could find out more about that. So I reached out, and Ryan Gruss wrote back and was willing to do it, and so now we have him on board. Ryan, how are you this morning?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be a part of this.
Yeah, well, it's really great to have you on too. I think, in a lot of cases we've had people who've done different parts of the music industry, but I think this is really the first time that we've done someone that focuses on loop development, and it's really great to have you come and tell us a little bit about it. Now, one of the ways that I always start off every podcast is I ask people to talk a little bit about their background. And in your case, I think it would also be helpful for you to talk a little bit about the things you do at the Loop Loft to make that happen. But then really the background that got you to the point where you're what I consider a fabulous artist, the artist that you are.
Thank you. Well, it's definitely a long and windy road, but I'll try to make it a quick story, at least to get to where it is today. As probably many of your guests have started out, I started off as, and still am, obviously a drummer or musician. There's a joke right there somewhere, but we won't go there. I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, born and raised in Des Moines. Started drumming at a pretty early age, 8 or 9, just pots and pans, until my parents finally caved and bought me a snare drum, and then they finally caved and bought me a drum set, and that led to drum lessons. And fortunately, the school district I was in had a very incredible arts program, so really got into jazz and the jazz band world and that whole thing, which taught me a lot. And ended up getting a scholarship to the Berklee School of Music in Boston, and went there for 4 years where I studied music performance. I was a music production and engineering major for a while, which was incredible, and I learned a lot just even from that first year, but it took away from, I couldn't practice anymore. I was always in the studio, working on recording projects, right, when I really wanted just to be drumming. So I switched over to a performance major and graduated from Berklee in 2000. And then as most wannabe professional drummers do, I made the decision either LA, New York, or Nashville, and I went LA. Well, the rest of my friends all went to New York, so I went to LA, and as a lot of people know, if you go to LA without any ins, it's a pretty tough nut to crack. So, you end up climbing the LA ladder of wedding bands and corporate gigs and sitting in traffic on the 405 for 3 hours. And I soon realized that wasn't the town for me, as I heard all the fun my friends were having in New York. So packed up my car, drove across the country, and ended up in New York, where I just fell in love with the city, and that was definitely the place for me. So I landed in New York, and as a musician trying to survive in New York, one often has to get day jobs. So I was fortunate enough to find out about a temp agency that was temping for jobs at Atlantic Records. So if I'm going to work a job in the day, I want to be doing something, music related. So I started temping at Atlantic, just kind of bouncing around from department to, wherever they needed me. And then about 2 weeks in, just from moving to New York, I landed a job as Ahmet Erdogan, who's the founder of Atlantic Records,
Atlantic, yeah,
as Ahmet's assistant. So pretty wild. I moved to New York, and 2 weeks later, I'm answering the phone for Aretha Franklin and Eric Clapton and all these people calling in to talk to Ahmet, and listening to demo CDs and opening his mail, and pretty wild stuff. So I was Ahmet's assistant, and then I kind of moved up the ranks at Atlantic into kind of the creative department and product management side of things. All the while I was still drumming at night too. So not sleeping a lot, but gigs at night, Atlantic Records during the day, and just kept doing stuff in New York, and eventually got into this profession of digital asset management, which took me from Atlantic to Nickelodeon, and handling all their digital files online. And this is like kind of way before Dropbox, and this is when companies were kind of building their own custom solutions to deliver securely, deliver and share digital assets, online with licensees and partners. So that's where I kind of learned like some technical chops on the back end, which later on when I would start the Loop Loft would really pay off. But in the meantime, I just thought it was a dumb day job.
Right.
Just trying to survive.
Right.
And at the same time, I was playing in bands. I was in a rock band called the Rinse, and we were signed with Peter Asher, who's a pretty well-known producer manager.
Yeah.
We were signed to Peter. He was managing us, and as the music industry was crumbling, almost had deals with Columbia. Then an A&R guy would get fired, and then almost another deal somewhere else. And we toured with Maroon 5, and we did all this amazing stuff, but it was just like kind of ran its course, and I just kind of realized I didn't want to try to make it as being a guy in a band in the music industry. And I had learned, a lot of production techniques on the Atlantic Records side of, how to create and release something. But I just kind of put everything on the back burner for a while, and got married and ended up in Boston at an innovation consultancy called Continuum. And that's where I finally had room to have my drums set up in my house in a recording studio, kind of where I could just go down any time of the day and record. So in 2009, I started a blog. It was just ryangruss.com. It's still there. It's still up, I think, last time I checked. And since I was kind of away from my friends in New York and LA, I was kind of not isolated, but I was out in the suburbs of Boston in my house with my drums in my studio. I started just recording. My thing was like, I'll just record a loop every day and just post it. And not just a stereo loop, but a full multi-track. I was using Logic at the time. The Logic session of whatever I was working on. Just kind of like a digital diary of me still just being on the drums and sharing content, and also kind of learning, production on a little deeper level for myself. So every day I was just, giving away free stuff. And then eventually Peter Kern at createdigitalmusic.com picked up on it and ran a piece on it. And all of a sudden, obviously he has a pretty well-known blog, and was just flooded with traffic and people, really digging what was happening and asking if I could, record this, record that. So I began a subscription section on the site where for $10 a month, you could just have access to everything I was creating, like 100 loops a month or something like that.
Right.
That's set the goal for. So after a couple of years, I had thousands of loops and some knowledge about how to, package and sell stuff and distribute stuff online through all my day jobs. And hence the Loop Loft was founded in 2010 with kind of taking those loops and organizing them into categories. So you could buy a funk pack of all the funk loops I'd ever done, or pop stuff or jazz stuff, and kind of categorizing them that way. So it was a more cohesive download that you could do. And that was the beginnings of the Loop Loft in 2010. It was just me and my loops. And then as we've grown over the years, we've partnered with different software companies, like Ableton and Propellerhead and Presonus, and kind of customizing our content for their platforms to work a little more, seamlessly and integrated. And then as well have gone on to sign a bunch of these, incredible musicians who have joined our roster. Like, some of my favorite drummers in the world, Matt Chamberlain and Omar Hakim and Joey Waronker, and just the guys that were my heroes, still are my heroes, growing up. It's amazing to be able to record them and kind of offer their drumming, their magic DNA that's between those notes, for anybody to use in their productions. And I guess that kind of takes us to where we are today.
Sure. What an amazing story. So
I told you it was long and windy.
it is, but it's also that trail to success that is so common, which is that nobody would have ever made a map that looks like this, right?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't the way I set out to make a living in the music industry, but I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, well, so I have to admit that I'm kind of, it's not like I'm a stalker or anything, but I'm incredibly fascinated by the Atlantic story. And so you worked as his assistant. To what extent did that give you a chance to sort of like peek behind the curtains and learn things about the music industry that would help you in some of the other stuff that you did? Or was it mostly just like going to Starbucks for coffees and stuff?
No, I mean just sitting there. So his office was kind of in the executive area, so it was him and the other chairman and CFOs all kind of in this special section of the headquarters there, and just being there and overhearing conversations, and he would, I would sit in on meetings and listen to demos with him, and it wasn't just there was getting the coffee kind of stuff and running around town and doing what assistants do, but just kind of being around those guys and seeing their vision for what works and learning what resonates with people, and the learning that the marketing side is just as important as the product itself, even though the product must come first. If you don't know how to market it, it's kind of the tree falling in the forest.
Sure. Well, and it's interesting because what you said right there is actually sounds to me like a big part of your background, because so you do that, you get a chance to see this kind of in the works, but then you do a band. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of the band.
It was called The Rinse, Rinse. So
Okay.
yeah, it was a kind of a Brit. The singer was from London and
All right.
Williamsburg, Brooklyn, mid 2000s kind of thing. That
Right.
was happening.
So, but you kind of get this sense of marketing. You're working with a band. Obviously, you had to do some marketing to get Peter Asher's attention because, uh, I think of him maybe from a prior time, but this is the same Peter Asher that was like Linda Ronstadt and these people,
Exactly.
right?
And he ran Apple Records for the
Yeah,
Beatles.
yeah.
He was the one that was in charge of that. So
Right. So you clearly had to do some marketing to get seen on that. But what's interesting to me is that even when we start talking about your blog and the beginning of your sort of like sample development career, it seems like you were kind of savvy in doing things like, here's a loop a day.
yeah, it's just I'm kind of one of those deadline driven people where that's the one way, and just to get traction online, like you gotta be consistent. It's
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So often, I talk to people about the thing that they're doing, and they don't get the idea that on the internet, what you have to either be is you have to either be consistent or you have to be the brightest frickin' star in the universe,
yeah,
right? And it costs a lot of money to be the brightest star.
yeah, it's a little easier to be well, not easier to be consistent, but
Well,
it's
it's certainly cheaper.
yeah, cheaper, more.
And and what it does is it sort of preferences, work over PR money, right? But the thing that's interesting is that through that consistency, you end up on Peter Kern's radar. And I'll tell you, Peter has got a quite a lighthouse there in the CDM environment. It's a pretty amazing thing that he's developed, and it's interesting to hear that is what kind of brought people to bear, and kind of launched you on your current career path, right?
Yeah, it was that one blog post is kind of what to me like signaled what I'm doing, resonated. So I
Right.
go back to, the Atlantic thing is like once you see, it's that I threw that against the wall and it stuck. And obviously, there was a demand for more. So that's just where I kind of hunkered down. And that's when, the 100 loops a month things really just, I was like, all right, well, let's just see where this goes and keep pushing. And it just kept going up and up.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the Loop Loft and particularly some of the production work that you're doing there. So you started off creating packages of your own work, and I've gotten a chance to experience some of them, and you're a pretty freaking good drummer.
Thanks.
But then, yeah, it seemed like you decided that once this is going to take off, you were going to reach out to these people that are like your heroes. And I'll tell you, I don't know of anyone who likes rhythmic music that isn't an Omar Hakim fan, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, just and he's still to this day like he was on the Daft Punk album. That's and you go way back to the Weather Report stuff, and just he's
Just stunning.
everything. Yeah.
And so I'm curious, how is it that you engage with these people? I mean, it's hard for me to imagine you can just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Omar, this is a guy in Boston.
Yeah.
You want to record some loops for me?"
Yeah. It's how do most of these happen? I mean, it's all connections. It's all and luckily, being in New York, I lived there for almost 9 years. Um, just by being a musician and also working on the record side of label side of things, your network, it's pretty amazing how quickly and how large it grows over
Sure.
just a few years. And um, yeah, Omar was, he was actually a connection through one of the software companies that we partner with. Somebody
Right.
that I work with. I was talking about who I would like to record, and that his name came up, and of course, this guy I happened to be a good friend with him and put us in touch. And Omar had he'd been approached many times about doing it, but he never felt right about it. Never.
Sure.
And then see something about the Loop Loft kind of struck a chord with him, and we hit it off. And that's kind of been the same way with a lot of Matt Chamberlain, and I'd been on Matt for years, just trying to get him. And I think he kind of saw where this was headed, and like my consistency for really just this is what I was doing, and the artist roster was growing, and it's and it's I try to kind of approach it kind of like a Blue Note mentality, where it's this certain tier, certain level of artistry that is quality that is there. So like back in the 50s 60s, you would see a Blue Note release and you would just know it's gonna be good.
It was going to be great. Yeah.
So that's just kind of what I aim for on the artist roster side of things.
Well, and that's really interesting that you say that because I pay attention to all the different things that are going on in the music industry, and I get different mailings from all the different kinds of companies that that are doing libraries of different sounds and stuff. And there are some of them that are like, this week 59 new releases.
Yeah,
We have techno, country, bluegrass, blues, volume 17, and stuff like this, right?
yeah,
You have taken a really different approach. I mean, both with your own work and with these other people, you've created something that actually does seem more like a label than it does a library company. And but you've also really focused on classic recordings. I listen to the work, and I would say that all of it has a timeless characteristic to it.
yeah. That's another thing I kind of strive for is just classic, natural, punchy sounding drums that aren't over affected and produced. And you can always add reverb to something later or distort something later or whatever. But if you don't have a clean, source material, you can't really pull those layers off after the fact.
Right, and well, it reminds me too, when I listen to the stuff, it reminds me how easy it is for the reverb of the day to take a wonderful drum track and turn it into a really cool drum track from 2003.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, it's pretty
And
easy to date something with a reverb.
yeah, it is. It is because they have such peculiar characteristics. Or, what you hear a lot of now is kind of like really peculiar compressor techniques,
Hmm.
and how that seems to be stuff that's going to really date things that are done now as having, as being 2014 things.
Yeah, yeah. And the really cool thing that's kind of happening now is people are using our loops as kind of learning material. So we offer stereo loops, of course, like in Rex and Wave and just drag and drop kind of stuff. But we're also doing full multi-track sessions. So they're cut up as loops, but people that are using Pro Tools, we have complete Pro Tools templates that you download, and then you can drag and drop a Matt Chamberlain groove in there that has all 15 microphones on his kit.
Right.
And people are learning how to mix drums and dial it in for, their taste. Cause every song and every production is completely different. You never know what somebody's going to need. So this allows people to, one, have one of the best drummers in the world on their tracks and experiment with mixing that drummer, in their own. Cause now everybody has a laptop as a studio, and I've kind of been able to bring these people that nobody had access to studios that nobody had access to, because now they have them on their computers, and kind of be that guy in the middle that's just kind of the middleman for all this at-home production, or not even at home. There's huge musicians and studios that are downloading our stuff, on a daily basis, and it's an exciting time, definitely.
It is. So let's talk about your production process when you do this stuff. My assumption is that you are working in pretty top-notch studios. Do you personally get involved with on-site production?
Yeah, I'm definitely. I guess I'm the producer on all this stuff. So it's, I'll definitely have a couple conversations with the artist, before the session, and we'll talk about where we want to go, and who's going to engineer it, and we get all those details sorted out, and then we'll just talk about. I like to come in to each session with about 15 tempos and groove ideas. I'll just basically make a spreadsheet of, just so we hit a lot of different areas. And I usually kind of base it around what I know that drummer to, kind of signature sort of touching on things that they've done in the past. I'm not like, hey, Omar, play the, Daft Punk groove, but like, let's do something kind of disco-y and, or Matt Chamberlain, like, the one headlight, wallflowers, groove. But getting those certain kind of vibes out of those artists. And so, yeah, we'll have the list of grooves, and then we basically, just give me a bunch of different kind of verse feels with variations and some fills, just pretend you're kind of playing phrases, 16-bar phrases, just keep it musical and varied and but focused on a certain kind of vibe for each thing. And then there's a lot of switching out snare drums and kits and hi-hats, and that makes all the difference in the world as far as variety. And plus we sample those too, so people can then, if they need to recreate stuff or make their own fills or make their own beats, they have those sounds, but then they can also use the original grooves that we have. And then it's just a matter of, so we'll spend a day tracking in Pro Tools, and then I take everything home with me on a hard drive, and the next month or two is spent editing and cutting everything up and organizing. And that's the hard part, is coming home with 10 gigabytes worth of drum sessions and cutting it down to the final product.
Right. And I have some questions about that, but before we get there, do you have some studios that are your favorites to work at?
Yeah, a couple. I mean, I've done a lot of recording at the Bunker in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really cool studio. Actually, I do most of the stuff in their smaller studio, which has this incredible old Neve board, and it's a smaller size room, so you get a really tight, punchy sound there. That's that's been good. I love Matt Chamberlain has his own studio in the Sound City complex. I don't know
Okay.
if you saw the Dave Grohl Sound City movie.
Yes, I did.
Yes, like I'm sure many people did. So he's actually in that complex out in Van Nuys, not in the Sound original studio, but a smaller one right next to it.
Right.
And just an amazing sounding room. And of course, all of Matt's stuff is all there. So it's just like for a drummer, it was just a wall of like 50 different snare drums and
there's a picture on your website of someone working, and there's a room with like a shelf of just snare drums upon snare drums. Is that the room?
Yeah, that's Matt's personal studio.
Well, that's awesome. Because I saw that and I was like, well, somebody has got the ultimate tailored workspace right there.
Yeah, and with the way things are now these days with labels and budgets, he does the majority of, I don't know, a lot of his work is done out of there because the budgets aren't there to bring bands into the record plan or Henson Studios for a month and lock them down. They can't do that anymore. So a lot of stuff is him, and not just Matt, like a lot of most of the drummers I work with, recording in their project studios or smaller places.
Yeah, that seems to be kind of like one of the growing work areas for drummers, is this idea of being sort of like the remote drummer for hire.
Yeah,
and
as long as you have the work, it's great because you have all your stuff there and everything's dialed in, and yeah, you just hit record and go.
Yeah, although it seems to me like it's got to be hard both doing that work, like playing to someone else's relatively fully formed track. The sense of communally coming up with a groove is pretty much lost in that scenario. When you're working with people on doing recordings and stuff, how do you get them to how do you get them to sort of like lock in? Do you ever do fake production tracks for them to play along with? Do you ever have someone else playing along, or is it just literally a guy in a booth playing?
It's been a little bit of everything. I'm trying to think, especially with like guitar player. Like, so one of our artists is Mark Kelly, who's the bass player in the Roots. Mm-hmm. He's an old friend of mine from Berklee. Anyway, so we were recording in New York, and yeah, so with a bass player, it's kind of just sit down and play a funky bass groove. That's just it's you got to give them something a little more to latch onto. So I brought a hard drive full of different loops that I thought would be good, for Mark, and yeah, so Mark just played along with 20 different drum grooves until we had a bunch of different options, and then I've also done the thing where I've brought musicians together. So at the Bunker studio in New York, I brought together Charlie Hunter. I don't know if you're familiar with Charlie. He's an incredible, mind-blowing guitar player. He doesn't play just he plays bass and guitar at the same time, like 8 strings, or he's down to 7 strings now, but he's
down to 7 strings.
Yeah, but he has 2 brains that work separately. So he does the bass line and the guitar parts, and he's on D'Angelo's Voodoo album. A lot of people probably know him.
Yes.
So I brought Charlie in with Eric Harland, who's just this monstrous jazz drummer, and they'd never played together before. So that was really exciting because it's just like these 2 legends, like just again, like some of my favorite musicians in the world, getting them together with no rehearsal and just, again, I had a list of like 12 ideas, concepts, and then we just talk about a groove and get something happening, and then just let the tape roll, and it was amazing what came out of that.
Sure. So do you tend to do the kind of thing where you have a session and then that gives you enough material, one big shot gives you enough material to work up a loop collection?
Yeah. As long as again, like I always make sure that we get at least a dozen different tempos and styles. So, and then on each of those, as long as we have 5 to 10 minutes of a recorded performance, there's enough meat, potatoes in there and variation to go in and cut out 12 different verse grooves and 12 different chorus grooves and 12 different fills. And for each style. So at the end of it, you've got this plethora of things to pull from. And now with the technology, the beauty is you can speed things up and slow them down. So something might have been recorded at 110 BPM and your track is at 115, and you just drop it in Ableton or whatever you're working in, and there it is.
Right. Have you ever found yourself in a position where it was like you thought you had it and then you had to go back and then try and recreate the sound and the miking and all that stuff to match, or have you been pretty lucky as far as nailing it the first time?
Yeah, pretty lucky. I mean, fortunately, we've had some amazing engineers working on this stuff too. Like with Joey Warmaker, we had Daryl Thorpe, who he's engineered,
Yeah.
Gnarls Berklee and Air and Beck and Radiohead, and you're working with guys like that, and it's just like they can do no wrong. You come home and you just open up the session, and it's just knocks you over how good it sounds.
Right. It's beautiful. Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about kind of the grinder end of the work then, which is formatting for output. So in my case, most of the stuff that I bought from you has been the single shot recordings that you've done for Machine.
Mm-hmm.
But you do everything from Rex files to Ableton Live sessions to Logic sessions to Pro Tools sessions to stereo. You do all of these different things. What is sort of the order that you find? I mean, what are the things that you really like working with at the beginning, and what are the things that you kind of grind out at the end in order to get the product done?
Yeah, well, my favorite part in the beginning is kind of, well, one, opening up kind of the raw multi-track session that we did at the whatever studio, and that's where I get to really have a lot of fun because I'm the one that gets to create the stereo mix of that. So that's where I get to put on my engineering hat and geek out on plugins and kind of do my mixes, and then I share those mixes with the drummers to I always want them to be happy with the end result of the mix loops at least.
Right.
So there's a lot of collaboration and back and forth on that. We want more room sound because once it's a mixed stereo loop, it is what it is, and that kind of comes back to me wanting to keep things very dry and natural and not overproduced. Just a nice sounding. I want it to sound like it sounded like if you were standing next to the drum kit.
Sure.
So that's kind of my favorite part, and then the tedious editing chopping part. That's once we have, going through and finding all the slice points of where we're going to cut everything. And again, I do all that. And once we have a batch of edits of chopped up loops, then I have a team of people kind of scattered around the world via Dropbox, who help me, get those into Rex. And because that's a lot of hand slicing and editing right there to really do it right. And Apple Loop formatting and Stylus RMX, and so that's really where we kind of earn your money right there is the formatting and converting, and then there's so much more we're kind of doing on top of that going into next year. I mean, contact instruments, and there's a whole other world that we haven't really got into yet that is kind of our focus over this next year.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Especially as you're starting to branch out now. I mean, when you were first on my radar, other than I think a couple of libraries, almost everything you did was drums. Now you're doing more guitarists. You've got a saxophonist. You got bassists coming in and stuff. That starts pointing to kind of almost away from Rex files or RMX files and more towards Contact and some of these other kind of high-end sampler formats. So that's something that you see you're going to end up doing.
Yeah, and it's kind of my concept for the company too. The end vision is, I kind of think of it like fantasy football for music, where you can, except you get to like actually make a song out of it. So you could get your dream, pick your drummer, pick your bass player, pick your guitarist, and jam, or even just want to. A lot of guys just use our stuff to jam with or practice with because they want to jam with Omar Hakim, and
right.
They're not even recording songs; they're just as a practice tool. Or But just having the ability to pick and choose like all these, because every artist brings something signature. Like I can hear Charlie Hunter without knowing it's him, and just I'll know it's Charlie Hunter because it's Charlie Hunter, and same with Omar and Matt and these guys. It's a magical thing that no sample collection can reproduce. It's like that sample collections. I definitely appreciate them and see that there's a need for them out there, but for me, I don't want to record a snare drum at 30 velocities, and like I want I want to record somebody playing magic on the drums and give that to people.
Right, and that's the thing that I know for myself, because I'm buying these one-shot things. I realize I'm missing out on is the air in between the hits being the actual magic that's being done. But I'll learn. I'm sure.
But yeah, though, I mean the one shots are great because I mean they are like I said, we didn't do 30 velocity level. I wouldn't put any of my artists through that
Right.
that torture, and some of them have been through that torture and said they wouldn't do it. So I do not blame them. But yeah, it's for us, it's all about the performance and putting the humans back into the computers. Like I don't care how well you can quantize or program a drum beat, it's not going to sound like Omar Hakim.
That's a fact. Now, you said that you actually perform the 2-track mixes.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the plugins that you use to? Because again, and you said it, and so I'm going to follow up with it. This sort of concept of having or this sort of like Blue Note like concept,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of the classic or timeless nature of the stuff you're doing. I find the mixes to be extraordinarily good.
Thank you.
And so I'm curious, what for you in terms of plugins or in terms of, I mean, do you feel like the DAW you use is particularly important? What are the important things for you that help you take these great recordings and honor them by making a great mix?
Well, a lot of it just comes down to the initial recording process, getting it right the first time and not trying to fix it later. So luckily, like I said, I've worked with a lot of great engineers on the artist stuff where you just pull it up without any plugins and it sounds, there isn't much work to be done, because they've, in the recording process with the preamps and the EQs that we were using going into onto disc, I should say, not tape, got it right going in. So, in the mixing process, it's more just about, just compression and just a little EQ and just, my favorite plugin is, Ozone 6 right now, just on the mastering bus and just kind of, getting things just leveled off right. And, again, I'm not going crazy with, compression on kick and snares. That's already been kind of done in the recording process. And I find that takes away a lot of the snap and punch. You compress things too hard and you lose all your transients.
Yeah, I actually was really negatively influenced early in my recording days by working with an engineer who he never wanted to have a problem, so he overcompressed everything,
Yeah.
and everything just sounded like it was being squirted out of a tube of toothpaste. It was really it had that negative effect. So that was one of those like really good like counter mentoring things
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes we need. We need to see things done wrong so that we know how to avoid them as well, I guess. But
Yeah.
it's interesting you say that Ozone is an important player for you, because I find that to be one of the few plugins that really focuses or that really kind of rewards subtlety.
Yeah.
There's enough metering and stuff going on that you don't feel like you have to slam something in order to get a red light to light up.
Yeah.
And so, but I just find it to help produce wonderful work. But again, a lot of it has to be your ear as well. Now, I'm curious, going way back to the beginning of your background discussion, you went to Berklee, and you were doing performance. You did some work in the recording. How how much of sort of the elements of understanding production came from going to Berklee?
A lot of the kind of just 101 stuff, obviously, because that's those are the classes I took.
I see, right.
Like literally, like I remember one of the projects that sticks out is learning how to, not that you have to do this much anymore, but hand slicing tape and editing, edits and just all the miking techniques and just signal paths and just all the very basic stuff that unfortunately a lot of people today, that when they pick up computers and start learning music production, don't know, because they've never worked with actual gear before, and how signal A gets how A gets to B and all the stuff in between that makes a difference.
Right.
And then that was a small part of it, but the majority later on I learned was kind of in my New York years, working with the Rinse and going into the studio with guys like Peter Asher and like recording at Conway in LA, with being a drummer and running into the control room and seeing how that affected my drums, and what does that knob do to my kick drum, and just watching these incredible engineers manipulate my sound.
Right.
That was probably the biggest learning experience, was kind of being able to be a musician and also kind of really kind of understand what was going on as they were mixing my drums.
Sure. It's actually interesting you say that, because I've long postulated that one of the reasons that so many bass players become producers is because they're free to sit in the control room a lot, right?
Never thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, they're sitting right there at the desk the whole time.
Yeah, and but it's rare to see a drummer that will jump out from behind the kit and come running into the control room. So, congrats to you for that.
No, I definitely loved geeking out on those sessions.
Yeah. Now, the other thing though that came up in regards to Berklee that I think is actually really interesting and important is the number of times, as we kind of mapped your history, the number of times that friends you made at Berklee or people you got to know at Berklee ended up influencing your trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how you think. I mean, did that end up maybe being the most valuable thing that came out of your Berklee experience?
I definitely, yeah. I mean, Berklee's all about connections, and I learned a lot there, and it's a great school. It is what you get out of it. So you can go there and just not be social and not do jam sessions and leave there and not know anybody when you graduate and go back to your hometown and never do anything again. Or you can really immerse yourself, and I would go to jam sessions every night, all night long, and that's where I met all my best friends who have gone on to, Bob Reynolds, who's the sax player on the Loop Loft, was my roommate, and Mark Kelly, who's in the Roots, I was playing with him all the time, and John Mayer was a good friend who's at Berklee, and just all these guys, just kind of, you just live and breathe it 24/7 for 4 years, and then everybody kind of goes their own ways, but you stay connected, and your web kind of grows, from all those connections.
What that sort of reminds me of is the way that if you kind of like read music history, kind of the way that people talk about during the big band era, people who would be out with a big band. Then when they would start making small groups, they would draw from people that they met in the big band.
Yeah.
When they were recording, they would end up using people from those bands and stuff like that. It seems, the big band era now is long gone, but that it's almost like in your case at least, and I think in a fair number of cases, the school situation ended up providing that kind of network.
Yeah, no, it's hugely valuable, and there's a kid that just graduated from my hometown that's now at Berklee, and I'm kind of like living vicariously through him again as he's in his freshman year, and doing everything I did with the jam sessions, and it's glad to hear that's still going on there. It's still strong. Like the musicians network kind of hang thing is so important.
Right. And I wonder now, there seems to be more and more, and Berkeley's actually at the front end of the whole online educational thing. I wonder what is going, how that kind of networking or how that development of connections is going to continue if people aren't even in the same city anymore. And I also think that it's kind of interesting. You were talking about the drummer that has his own studio.
Oh, Matt Chamberlain.
Matt Chamberlain, sorry. Again, the idea that in a lot of cases, budgets or time constraints or whatever are preventing people from getting together in the studio and work together in the studio. And I wonder what the effect of that on sort of musician community. What's that like? How is that changing the way that musicians work with each other?
I kind of see it two ways. Like the opportunity to, unfortunately go into a hit factory is kind of gone, or the big, and multi-million-dollar studios. But now there's more and more home studios where people can set up and record and experiment without staring at the clock and worrying about budgets, and in a more relaxed kind of casual way. I think there's more opportunity to do that and really experiment and be creative. And I think that's where a lot of the music coming out today is a result from this collaboration thing. But yeah, it's again, it's also kind of a shame that you can't have world class equipment at your fingertips, for a month, and really, unfortunately, those days are kind of gone unless you can really afford to have that in your own studio.
Right. Yeah. Nobody's locking out studios for a year and a half anymore.
No, it's not sustainable.
Right. So, boy, we've burned through this time in a hurry. That's been fantastically interesting. I'm curious, and maybe you don't want to open this up, but if somebody said, "I want a life just like yours," how do I get started?
Oh man, I don't know. Oh,
I mean, first of all, would you even wish that on anyone? And secondly, do you think that the door is still open for a guy to just say, "I'm going to do a loop a day"? I mean, because one of the things I would say is, Peter Kern notwithstanding on getting you started in kind of the commercial work, one of the things I would say about the Loop Loft is you guys spend a tremendous amount of effort marketing what you do.
mm-hmm.
I am never at a loss to what the Loop Loft's current offering is, right?
Well, no, yes.
But that takes time and that takes effort and that takes a focus on marketing. And I would assume that some of that came from your work when you were kind of doing digital content management and stuff, understanding how to do that kind of marketing. But it also points to the fact that sets a really high bar for someone to just kind of come stumbling in and trying to do the same thing. Do you think that there is opportunity for people that want to pursue loop development as kind of a career path? Or do you feel like that might already kind of be occupied by the people that are going to be able to do it?
I mean, that's a good question. Of course, I would like to say, oh, there's no more room. Just
don't try.
Yeah, no, it's saturated. No, but there's always room. Like if somebody had said that to me in 2008 or 9, because there were a lot of loop companies back then. You just have to find your own niche and your own spin on it. And mine was the human, kind of human DNA aspect of it. Getting the earthy kind of life back into loop, because everything back then it seemed was very on the grid, EDM, techno based electronic stuff. And
right.
I felt a need for just wanting to connect with musicians, even if it was just through loops, like having stuff to play with that felt real. So, that's our take on it. But if somebody can find another spin, another angle on it that opens up another niche in the market, then sure, why not?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it. Again, I think just like there being a Blue Note record label didn't prevent other labels from existing, I think. I mean, you certainly have developed a very particular and wonderful angle on things. It's certainly different than what you see from East West or many of these other things. And for that, that's really something to be celebrated, I think. So, what's going to be up for 2015 for Loop Loft? What are the new things I'm going to get a chance to buy?
I'd say stay tuned for some very exciting and interesting artist announcements. Some big names, some big household names.
Are you going to be making noise around NAMM?
I will be there. Yeah, we won't have a booth, but the Loop Loft will be there in full effect, walking around and shaking hands and saying hi to everybody. So if anybody listening to this wants to meet up, just drop us a line on our website, and I'd be happy to connect with somebody. But yes, we will be there. A lot of my artists will also be there as well. So should be a fun time. And then just look for, we're doing a lot of kind of we're getting into the contact world and able more customized live packs and working with Reason on some stuff. So look for more integration coming out in 2015.
Fantastic. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and kind of giving us a glimpse inside of your world. I have to say, it's got to be a lot of fun to be you.
Oh, it's a lot of pressure and a lot of fun, but it's I can't complain.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right, you too, Darn.
All right, bye. And there you have it. I hope you take the opportunity to go over to the looploft.com and check out the kind of work that Ryan's been doing. It's really fantastic. And I think his sort of framing that company as kind of the Blue Note Records of samples is totally appropriate. Now, I'm going to take a departure, and instead of thanking people, which I kind of do every week because I'm very thankful for the support that you guys give me, I want to kind of change it up for the holiday season here, and I particularly want to talk about something that's come up. A friend of mine used to work at Spark Fun. He now is off doing his own thing. Has been very active in East Africa, working with different kind of maker groups, particularly the Ugandan Fundi Lab, which is sort of an African version of Makerspace. It looks like a phenomenal thing. He has started a Kickstarter specifically to put together a documentary, working with them to sort of like publicize things. He's asking for a modest amount of money, needs some backers. There's 16 days to go into Kickstarter. I'm going to ask you, it's by Linz Craig Tech Ed. But it's called DIY Technology in East Africa, a documentary. You could probably search around in Kickstarter to find it. Otherwise, if you go to artmusictech.libsyn.com, which is the home site for this podcast, I'll make sure that there's a link there. But do me a favor, I don't really ask for money on the podcast because it doesn't seem appropriate. But what I would like you to do is at least go and check out Lindsay's project, see if it's something that you're interested in supporting, and if you are, please pledge on that. Other than that, I hope that you have a great holiday season, however you celebrate it, and I will be back next week with some more good stuff. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.